Welcome to Antarctica Did That For Me. We're a podcast for everyday people with a little adventure in their hearts. We're Keri and Cassa, and we've spent huge chunks of our time living and working in Antarctica. Welcome to a journey that changed our lives. We hope it will change yours too.
Welcome to another episode of Antarctica Did That For Me. I'm Cassa Grant, one of your co-hosts, and I'm here with my other co-host, Keri Nelson.
Hey everybody, glad to be here.
Today's episode is a really fun one, and it's something that we get asked about a lot, which is what is it like down in Antarctica day to day? And so, as we've mentioned before, most of my experiences in McMurdo Station, and actually all my experiences in McMurdo Station, as Keri has been to many other places on the continent. So
I've been a few other places.
Yes, I'm going to talk a little bit about what my role was like down there, but we're going to talk a little bit about food and shelter, ways to get around, and stuff that would help us do the things that we're there to do. So first, we're going to start talking about our first jobs that we got, the things that got us down to Antarctica, and then we'll kind of talk more about the ones that we ended up in or the ones that we did later on. So the first one is, Keri, you were a janitor for your first season on the ice. Yes.
That's right. I sure was. Continues to be one of the best jobs I had in Antarctica. And I'm not even kidding. That was a lot of fun. So I'll tell you right now, you can, I believe, still put in an application to be a janitor in Antarctica and you won't regret it. It's a good time. So what did that job look like? Well, first of all, I felt really happy to get that job because I had also tried to sign up to apply to be the job that washes dishes, which they rejected my application. Nobody wanted my application because I hadn't had the right kind of food service job at the beginning. So I couldn't even apply for that job. But when they learned I had worked as a registered nurse in the past and had actually cleaned up poop, that qualified me to apply to be a janitor in Antarctica. So that's what got me. They literally in my interview, my then boss asked me what the biggest mess I had ever cleaned up was. And boy, did I have some stories for him from the hospital, but that's a different podcast. Anyway, so that was my first job as a janitor. What was your first job, Cassa?
Oh, that is such a great story about how you got into it. Yes. So my first job was a shuttles driver, and I had my commercial driver's license for, I think, around at least 5 or 6 years by the time I applied to go down there. And so that was the most obvious skilled activity that I could do to come in as an applicant. So that was my first job down there. And obviously I had driven like large vehicles, buses in the US, so it definitely gave me a little more cred that way. But we've mentioned how I was a Nepo baby. Like I knew somebody who worked down there already, who already worked adjacent to that shuttles department, and he recommended me to the supervisor, and that helped me a lot. I don't think I would have necessarily gotten in if I hadn't known him.
That's a good first job. That is a good first job.
So tell us about what it was like.
I never had been a shuttles driver. Oh yeah, let's do a day. We're doing a day in life here. So yeah. So what was life like in Antarctica? Well, I can only describe what life was like as a janitor in Antarctica. 16 years ago. That was a long time in the profession. The career has changed a little bit, although there are still janitors who have worked in Antarctica. But at that time, it was an enormous housing staff and enormous janitorial staff. I think there were probably at least 20 of us who were janitors and worked all over station. We cleaned dorms, we cleaned common areas, we cleaned work centers. And my first job was actually leading a little team of about 7 janitors. So I had a team and we would have an assignment of buildings on station. We would dole out the work. I along with being the leader who probably made $3 to $4 more per week or something like that. Right. But also do all the scheduling and all of the planning for that little team. But it was great. So you would get your dorm in the morning that you were supposed to go and clean, and you would get your work center. We should back up and just explain McMurdo as the unique animal in Antarctica it is. McMurdo is like the size of a town, and the carpenters have their own whole building, and the vehicle maintenance, the people who fix the trucks have their own whole building. And, there's so many buildings. I don't even know what the footprint is. They're trying to make it smaller, but it's many, many, many buildings. So we would have one dorm, which was a separate building to clean, and one work center, a whole building to clean in the afternoon. And that was pretty much the flow of the life of a janitor. You'd get up at about Well, work started at 7:30, so you could eat breakfast or not, whatever you needed to do to get yourself to the morning meeting. You'd do some stretching, you get your assignments, you'd go get your cleaning stuff, and you would just go out. It was a great job because in a town that's 1,000 people with a lot of buildings, but not that many buildings, it's rare to have any privacy at McMurdo Station. My first dorm actually had 4 of us in the room. There were 4 of us, and they were firefighters. So somebody always had a day off. The showers near my dorm were big and open with no curtains in between. They were like old school locker room showers, 3 spigots out the wall, no curtains in between. So you didn't even have privacy in the shower. You could have privacy if you were taking a long poo. That was the only privacy you got as a community member living in that dorm. So when you were a janitor and you were trying to clean dorms while everybody else was at work, then you got some privacy. You could listen to your tunes. You could stare out the window while wiping the sill. That's a pretty great job. I like that job a lot. I want it, but that's a very different day in the life.
That's a great good job about privacy, though, and I'm glad that you brought that up because it's true. You do start to feel like they're just always around people, especially that first season. As you said, I had also 3 roommates my first season, and a lot of them, we worked very, very shifts too, because we'd have night shift and we'd have day shift. And so one of your roommates was always on night shift. So when you were in your room during your time off, you had to be really quiet or you just went somewhere else, which then you didn't have any privacy, as you said. So it was definitely one of the biggest challenges, particularly around that first season. As you kind of move up in seniority, and I don't know how they do it now, but then you would just have one roommate. Ooh, how exciting. Only one roommate.
Luxury.
So, yes, moving on up, right? So yeah, for my first job, I was a shuttles driver. And as I mentioned, so there was a couple of things that shuttles did, but one of the biggest things is we do airfield support. So there were the military guys, the ANG, the Air National Guard out of New York, who were operating all the planes at the airfield. So we had to make sure that they were getting out to their shifts and their shift changes and making sure that everything was there with the pilots, obviously, too. So that was a lot of driving. So that was like 15 miles to get out to this airfield, and that was on the snow road. And so sometimes I would get, again, privacy in the van because if I didn't have we had regular scheduled shuttle services. So if I didn't have any passengers on my way out to the airfield, for example, it was just me in the van and singing lots of songs. And I used to always have I was very into playlists. This is my iPod. I always love playlists. I always love mixtapes. So I would make like themed mixes and things like this. And especially during Christmas, I'd do Cassa Grant's Wild Sleigh Ride and I'd make them listen to, now I think about it, I'm like, man, I was making them listen to some really bad Christmas music. But it was just like this band of like 10 or 15 people behind me. And I'm like, come on, let's go, guys. And it's getting really bumpy because the snow's really soft. And here we are just getting out to the airfield. It was, that part was really fun, actually. And then you would get to know people through the shuttle too, like who would sit up front with you and you chat with people, which was really fun. And one of the really important functions of shuttles that I didn't really realize at the time, but then later on was like, oh yeah, this is so important, is that we're kind of like the welcome wagon too, because we're the ones that bring people into town when they get off the airplane. And we're the ones that obviously take them back out to the airfield. But when you get to town, you usually go to an orientation. When you first get to the ice, the first day you get there, you go to an orientation. And then you have to go get your laundry and you have to go get your bag from the plane. And we, as shuttles drivers, we're doing taxi service to help people get their bags to their dorms. Like we are really their first experience of the town itself and have to go, okay, yeah, because they'll ask you like, well, where's my work center? Like they don't really know. How would they know? So you kind of give people a little tour as you're taking them around, especially if they're new, which was really fun. And I loved that, actually. That was like welcome wagon taxi and getting people to after flights. But then we would also just be taxi service in general because you don't have your own vehicle. Sometimes if you have to haul something to a different building or you just need it, a ride up to an area like Arrival Heights, which is where we had a satellite dish, that kind of thing. We would run general taxi service for that. And that worked out really well. So you would just kind of wait for your taxi call to come and then go around and do different taxi things, which was super fun. You learned the town really well. You learned, you met a lot of different people and you got to see the inner workings a lot. And then the final thing that we really did was maintaining vehicles. So really making sure that the vehicles were where they needed to be. And obviously they would go to the vehicle maintenance center as well, but we had to just make sure that fluids were topped up, there weren't major leaks, that kind of thing. So that was fun because there's some really weird machinery that we run down there. And it was fun to kind of get, I mean, for me anyway, to get intimate with all these weird, interesting vehicles.
You were basically the first Uber of Antarctica. Like you were the
basically
you're the ride share of McMurdo Station. Call your Lyft.
Basically. It was great.
5
it was
stars.
Really fun. And And it was so fun. You could go from like giving a taxi ride to like the station manager to like to the Janos who were doing a big job and they needed to be able to carry all their stuff up to wherever. It was just the variation was so fun and so interesting.
Yeah. That does sound like a fun job. I always kind of thought that that would be a job that I'd love to have. I never got myself into that core though. That's a good one. You've had other jobs. We both had other jobs in Antarctica. Those were our kind of baby first steps jobs. I mean, just to list, let's just list some of the jobs that we've had. We can maybe pick another one and talk about a day. But I've been in charge, as you mentioned, of the station stores, like the shops at McMurdo and South Pole at Palmer Station. I've done that for lots of years. I've worked as the post in the postal part of it at both McMurdo and South Pole. I've been like the station admin at Palmer. That's much more of an officey and order in. I mean, that job takes in logistics and supply and I mean, all sorts of little things, but real catch-all jobs. I've had a lot of jobs that wear many hats at the same time, but no, just since that janitor job, that was really the only job that I had that was just kind of one focus, one job. I've never had a job in Antarctica since that was a one focus, one job kind of thing. So my typical days are really varied.
But I do want to hear more about the store. Can you tell us more about a day in the life of Keri as I'm calling you the store proprietress, but the lady that ran the store? Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, the place that took more of a day need to do more every day was McMurdo Station again, because it's a huge population there and the store physically is enormous. And there's just a lot more cargo to deal with coming in there. And in fact, the McMurdo operation also feeds the South Pole operation. So you're processing all of the materials for two of the stores in the station. So typically you would come in and you would do, you would get the store all right. It's a lot of real store stuff, right? So you're running the tills, keeping open hours and keeping things on the shelves and restocking. But, and there's definitely part of this enormous space that has all of the public coming in at every hour that they're in a volcanic town with a lot of crushed dust where you're just cleaning constantly, like literally you're cleaning every day because there's so much dust that piles up in the public spaces. That's why there were so many janitors, for example. So that's definitely an element of what you're doing. But there's this back end of the store in Antarctica too, where you really are dealing with the warehouse. Like you're actually accepting what has come to you from the plane. You are cutting into the boxes in your Carhartts and dealing with heavy equipment and pulling stuff out of these big boxes, repackaging it, sometimes tagging it, putting it way down in this warehouse, and just dealing with the flow of trucked goods coming in and out too. And so in that way, that was a lot of fun. And part of the element of the job that I had almost all of the years, I don't think I ever was strictly a store worker, but at McMurdo Station, the beverage movement was always a part of that. We sold beverages in the store, soft drinks and hard and alcoholic drinks. And we would also sell those same things in bartended, trained bar service spots, which no longer, I believe, don't exist. The spaces exist, but the bar service doesn't exist at McMurdo Station anymore. But at the time, we would spend a lot of time, several times a week, moving beverages into those spaces because it was just like running any bar, any restaurant. You just need a constant flow of supply. One other thing that was part of that job, because we are in Antarctica and all of the supplies of the store come in like once a year, maybe twice a year if you're lucky, and you only get so much and it's got to stretch the whole time. I don't think Walmart itself, I don't think a 7-Eleven itself could exist on those parameters one time, and you got to make it last. So a lot of what you're doing is kind of making sure that it lasts for the community, making sure that somebody doesn't drink all of the Coke in the first week. Sorry, everybody, but it's got to kind of last for the season. So you're doing a lot of that kind of for everybody's good management. It's management, it's supply chain management, but you just have to manage it as the season goes on. And that people have opinions about that. So dealing with the feedback, the opinionated feedback of the community is also a big part of that job. Love you,
for sure. And actually, that was one thing I was going to talk about
for
too.
LaCroix, specifically, love it. I love it for all of us. Super fun.
Yes. I mean, one of my favorite things about the store is that you would go in there, and especially this would be in the winter too, but you could just spend a good half an hour or 45 minutes just bullshitting with people in the store. And it was so hilarious how people would just kind of hang out in there. And also because it was that and Scott Base for McMurdo in particular, those are your only shopping experiences. And are so, I mean, and this is a whole other thing about consumerism, but shopping can be fun, right? Shopping is fun a lot of times. And so when you only get this one shopping experience, even though you've seen the same old box of toothpaste on the same shelf every time you go in, you still go in. And one thing that I think is funny and cool about the store there too is that we used to have movies that you'd rent out there too. So people would talk about movies over in the movie corner, and it just became kind of this social hub that I thought was really cool. I have very fond memories of the store, but also I had a friend that worked in there as well, and we would go in and bug him and just have a good old time. So the store is definitely kind of a social hub too.
It's totally true. And it's atypical. I don't know. This was my own picture of my mind of who is a shopper in the world, who loves shopping. It's not always the people you think. There's definitely people who are like atypical to the vision I had in my small mind about who loves to shop. I don't know why I wasn't expecting a lot of men over their 70s to really, really love shopping a lot in the store, like all the time, like always asking. But it was built into that particular group of people's psyche much more than I thought it would be. So store's good.
Yeah, which is
we would
so
have
cool.
fun. We would have live music in the store sometimes. We would put up displays. The South Pole store is much smaller. The Palmer store is much smaller. There's less room for that sort of thing to happen. But it's still, you try and make the store, knowing what you said, because it is people's leisure time. You don't have a lot of choice about what you get to do or where you get to go when you're in that kind of closed loop situation. So I always try to remember that if people are in the store, it's because they want to be there. They're choosing of their free will to be there. So make it kind of recreational, make it pleasant, make it be that morale boost. Because a lot of what the store is in Antarctica is a morale booster.
Agree.
And people who are shopping there should remember that for the people working there too. Be nice.
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. And
just a little PSA.
Yeah. And so then for my second job, I moved into supply. So I was, and that was actually kind of on accident. I wanted to winter. One of my boyfriend at the time was wintering. And so I was like, well, I'll look for a job. And so supply is one of the bigger departments in the winter, because that's when we're actually unloading all of the things that came off the ship. It usually comes in January or February. So I moved into supply. And since I did have heavy machinery experience with my bus driving days and shuttles, etc., I was put into the vehicle maintenance facility. But it's basically where we house what's called operations supply. And so we supply, like I said, power, water, wastewater, fuels, the South Pole Traverse, as well as the vehicle maintenance facility. And so that's a very, very busy workstation. So we were open not 24 hours, but as much as they were open. So I think 20 hours a day it's open. So we had a night shift and a day shift. And, they're constantly working on machinery, because the machinery is what's keeping the station going in a lot of ways. We have loaders that move things around. We have obviously the vehicles that move things around. And when those go down, it really can mess up an operation or a department quite a bit, because they can't keep their workflow going. So that's part of why they have 24-hour ops for that particular department. So we were basically, I called it advanced fetch. So it was like, my partner he was a diesel mechanic, and I'm like, your job is advanced Lego, and my job is advanced fetch. Like, here's the thing, girl. You think you can find it? Can you find it, girl? Okay, bring it back, girl. Come on, you can do it. Good girl. And I just felt like that was constantly my job, because sometimes, we have a very limited supply amount down there. And so, for example, let's say windshield wiper for a van, very simple thing we'd see every day. And obviously with those, we would have plenty of those, but there were certain things, like maybe a wiper on a certain very special loader or something you wouldn't have. So we'd think about, okay, well, which one could we use instead? Or, there was always kind of this, a little bit of detective work going on with some of these things. And then also we had 65,000 line items. So that's a lot of stuff to know about. And that's not even actually the physical items. That's just the type of thing that we had. So there were inaccuracies in the record keeping. You'd go to a place and it'd be supposed to be in a certain location, and it's not on that shelf. And so then you look around the whole other shelves, and you look at the other place, and then sometimes you'll find something completely out of place. And we had so many different areas that we keep things too. So we repurposed a lot of the old fuel tanks. I think we had just discussed a little bit in one of the other episodes. We have huge round fuel tanks where we keep fuel, but old ones, they had cleaned out, made safe, put ventilation in, and we use those for storage, because it keeps the snow off some of these bigger crates and items that can sit in the cold, but that you don't necessarily want sitting out on a line getting snow and wind and basically sandblasted for all year. So
Right.
there was all these different warehouses that most people don't even have any experience with, because why would they? That we were kind of digging through and finding stuff in. And that was a challenging job. So I moved into that for winter, and then I ended up running that department for a couple of winters as well after doing that as my first winters. And then my other 2 winters I was in that role, in the leadership role for that.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I guess I did. I knew the last part of your career, Cassa, but the first part, I enjoyed hearing some of those stories. If you don't mind, I think I'm going to just present these are all pictures of a specialized place, right? Where I could have a job that was just the store, and Cassa could have a job I mean, you were busy as all get out, but you could have a job that was just supply or just logistics. And that's McMurdo Station. That's what having a lot of people and a lot of specialty jobs offers. I'm going to give a little picture right at the end here of what it looks like at a smaller station. What is a typical day in the life of I spent 6 or 7 years at Palmer Station. Anyway, where there is in theory, max population of just over 40 people. And there is a winter population of about 20 people. And it means that, and half of that is science. You know what I mean? There's a much higher science to person ratio at Palmer Station. Sometimes it's even 50-50, 1 grantee, 1 scientist for every person. That's not the case at McMurdo. It's a fraction of the population of McMurdo is science, because of all the crazy jobs, the specialties. Anyway, so what does a typical day look like? And it looks the same for a lot of jobs. So I'm just going to pick out the electrician, for example, not even a particular person. For your day at Palmer Station, same as the rest of the program, starts at the typical business hours are 7:30. Everybody gets there, you have your meeting, you start your work. But then suddenly, maybe at 8 o'clock, somebody is going to be helping clean up after the breakfast crowd, which goes later for the grantees. So you're taken away from whatever you're doing, and you're spending an hour, you're cleaning up. So then you might go and you might settle in again. But then guess what? It's a tiny station. So everybody's got to be on kind of at least one, if not all of the emergency teams. And if you're going to be in charge of medical at a station or fire at a station or glacier rescue, and you're the only ones, you're going to need some training. So maybe you wiped up, but then starting at 10:15, guess what? You're going to have to get yanked away from your job again, and you're going to go train to be a firefighter. You will gear all the way up. You're going to put the thing on. You're going to crawl through buildings, a smoke machine. Oh, you're late for lunch. You eat lunch, but then the boat's coming in. So suddenly the whole station is required to either line handle, pull in those things, to move cargo, to all sorts of things that happen. There's science coming off that boat that needs to get in the labs right away, or the little krill die before they can be studied. There's all sorts of things happening. There's the space you work in is only so big, just like at McMurdo, but you got to get that stuff off, but there's no more stuff coming off. So then by then, maybe it's even 4 in the afternoon, 4:30, but guess what? There's glacier safety training, and you got to go learn how to do that. So the whole day is shot because you have all of these other things, and you never really got to whatever your job was. What did I say? Electrician? Who knows what you're supposed to be doing? So you look at your next day. Guess what? You're starting out again. You maybe didn't have the morning cleanup that day, but there's going to be an all-station meeting, so you better show up for that. There's all-station cleaning, so you show up for that at a certain time. So at smaller stations, you're still doing the same functions that we've mentioned happening at this bigger McMurdo station, but you actually wear a lot of hats, and they're kind of important ones. Like, you need to know what to do when the power goes out, kind of stuff. And your life becomes a lot of that kind of maintenance of a station in a really different way. And I suspect that is not at all different from many other stations that are at that in that same size. It just takes so many people to keep people alive and functioning. Electricity on, snow shovel. Let's not even start it with the boardwalks that we're shoveling constantly. So it's much more chaotic. It's hard to even describe a day in the life of when you wear that many hats. So that's just another picture of what Antarctica life can look like. That's one more to add to your palette.
I'm really glad you shared that, Keri. Yeah, that adds a lot. And I wonder, and
you
how
do
people
done.
get their jobs done in that instance?
That is the never-ending question. I mean, people do get their jobs done.
It would be challenging.
People are selected in theory to be a person who can juggle a lot of things, who's eager about it. A lot of the things that happen are on a smaller scale. So there's no way 400 containers are coming off of our ship. Maybe 5 to 7 containers are coming off on that particular ship that came down and that particular science cruise. So it's a completely different world. I didn't even understand how different Antarctica was, but it is different. And I know we're not even getting at what some other people's experiences were. Like my husband Alex
No.
was 2 years at Halley Station, which was high up on an ice shelf. It was in look more similar to South Pole, but they were close to the coast, you know what I mean? And they were operating, that was Halley Station, where those famously fall off, those stations until recently were meant to fall off into the ocean. Even for Cassa and I, it's just, I always have to make myself remember how different people's experiences are and how many things are happening there. It's really a dynamic place.
Agree. Totally agree. Yeah. And thank you for bringing that home, because I agree. I completely agree. And it's fun for us to share these so that people understand our experiences. But yeah, there's so much variation. So that's a little bit of a day in the life of Antarctica, our experiences down there. Again, there's many, many other ones. Thank you again for listening. We always love having you here. And we have a little bit of an Antarctic challenge.
Sure. So try this one. This is another that we want to make to have the world connect. And since you're listening to us, we would like you to be part of that movement. And your mission this week is basically just to reach out to someone, and it doesn't have to be a high pressure reach out. It could be something like an old friend you haven't talked to in a while, or someone who's been trying to get a hold of you, who you've just fallen off each other's radar. Nobody's fault. It just happens. Or it could be somebody new, like in the grocery store, just to say hi. That looks like a cool thing that, I know, whatever. I don't know, but it doesn't have to be a long interaction, and it doesn't have to be a person you ever see again in your life. But we are right now in trying to build the habit of connecting to the world, because it's when you connect to people or to things, all of the things we ask you to do are going to be along that vein. Those are the channels that help you find your next adventure. And we're all about helping anyone listening think about, what's our adventure was Antarctica. We learned some things about Antarctica. What's your adventure? So anyway, try that. Reach out, build connection. We can't wait to hear how that looks for you. Thanks for listening to the Antarctica Did That For Me podcast. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to support our efforts, we would love it if you would tell your friends. And if you leave us a review on Spotify or Apple, it will help us find more of our fellow adventurers. We release a new episode every Tuesday, and we are a video and audio podcast, so you can watch or just listen. We're on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, and more, or find everything, including links to our social media, at our website, antarcticadidthatforme.com. Thanks again for listening, and until next week, keep thinking about what opening your own heart to adventure could do for you.